Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Hey, we're talking about Chinese New Year or the Lunar New Year. I say Chinese New Year myself. But we're going to talk about how this has become somewhat of a controversy, especially in today's world where everybody is looking to be offended. They want to be offended about something. Oh, so it gets kind of tiresome, I would say. Everyone being hypersensitive and just being offended for anything. We're going to talk about how this is now an issue, is if you actually wish somebody a happy Chinese New Year, especially if they're in another Asian country, say Korea or Malaysia or something like that.
This is a problem concerning how it's translated into English, I believe, because you don't really have a problem within Chinese. You just call it 过年. But if you're trying to translate that into English, well, what do you say?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going down south for Lunar New Year, or I'm going to visit some friends in Taidong during Chinese New Year. So, yeah, what are you supposed to say if you're speaking English? And that seems to be the problem. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's read the entire contents of our lesson for today, and we'll come right back to break it down for you.
In many cultures, bursting firecrackers and enjoying a hearty New Year's Eve dinner with family mark the arrival of the most eagerly anticipated holiday of the year. However, should we refer to the celebration as Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year? Last year, this very debate caught the British Museum in a tangle when it innocently advertised a Korean Lunar New Year event. Much to the museum's astonishment, this announcement sparked criticism from numerous Chinese online users. Those against Lunar New Year emphasized the tradition's Chinese roots, asserting that the term should reflect China's profound cultural and historical influence over nearby Asian countries. However, another incident in 2023 involving Danielle Marsh, a Korean-Australian pop singer, shed a different light on this contention. Her Chinese New Year message to fans was met with opposition from many in the Korean community. Both incidents illustrate how challenging it is to choose the right expression. Advocates of Lunar New Year argue that Chinese New Year is a relic of the West's tendency in the past to conflate Asian cultures, usually leaning toward the Chinese. This bias is evident in phrases such as Chinese cabbage and Chinese pancake, which can overlook the rich diversity of Asian cuisines. Many Asian countries, while acknowledging Chinese historical influence, have incorporated their own unique elements into this celebration. Vietnam, for example, celebrates the Year of the Cat rather than the rabbit from the conventional Chinese zodiac. Hence, an increasing number of people believe it appropriate to use Lunar New Year because it's a more inclusive term. Despite the growing acceptance for Lunar New Year, the different ideologies behind these terms represent a challenge in reaching a general consensus. Public figures and institutions should ponder the implications of their choices of words. Otherwise, even a friendly greeting could invite unexpected trouble. Okay, guys, let's dive in. This is our Lunar New Year versus Chinese New Year. The annual controversy. It's a controversy that comes up once a year because, as you know, Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year comes around once a year. It's an annual holiday and one that is very, very exciting, especially for the kids. They look forward to this every year.
Right.
Yeah, it's like our Christmas. That's what we say.
And, of course, this particular celebration is determined according to the lunar calendar. That's why it takes place at a different time every year. Lunar means having to do with the moon, whereas solar has to do with the sun. So sometimes you can see a lunar eclipse when the Earth blocks out the sun's light on the moon and the moon turns kind of red. It's kind of interesting to see. They're more common than solar eclipses. But the next lunar eclipse won't be for quite some time, unfortunately. But we're talking about Lunar New Year versus Chinese New Year, and this is a controversy that takes place every year. Again, when you want to express this term in English. And in many cultures, bursting firecrackers and enjoying a hearty New Year's Eve dinner with family mark the arrival of the most eagerly anticipated holiday of the year. So these are some features of Guonian, or Lunar New Year, or Chinese New Year, whatever you want to call it. First of all, we've got those bursting or exploding firecrackers.
Yeah.
Those are the small little red ones that go pa 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 pa.
Yeah.
Those are firecrackers. If you're talking about the ones that get shot up into the sky and they explode with lots of colors, those are fireworks.
Yeah, well, we always say fireworks in the plural form to talk about those that are shot up into the sky and that explode into these beautiful colors and shapes sometimes. I love fireworks. Firecrackers are part of the culture here. I remember when I was here my first time, it was long, long ago, and anyone could buy firecrackers. They would sell them at these like neighborhood stores, and they're illegal in my state where I grew up, but I would package up these firecrackers and I would mail them to my younger brothers who just thought that was the best thing on earth. They loved having firecrackers. They make that loud sound, but it kind of announces the opening of a new store, or the opening of a new period on our calendar. I think they're really fun. So you could be, if you're in some of these cultures, celebrating a new year with bursting firecrackers and enjoying a hearty New Year's Eve dinner with family. Hearty here just means a lot of food. You've got a meal that you have so many dishes you can't count them. And this marks the arrival, or kind of celebrates the arrival, of the most eagerly anticipated holiday of the year. That's true in Asia, not so much in America or other foreign-speaking or English-speaking countries where Christmas is the big holiday. But here, of course, it's the New Year, the Lunar New Year. However, here's the question. Should we refer to the celebration as Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year? I know which one I would choose.
Exactly. So, of course, you're trying to translate this term into English. And, of course, most people don't know the term Guonian. Guonian, what the heck is that? And so then you have to use an English term. But you've got a choice here. You could use Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year. And which one would you prefer to use if you're talking to foreigners? And last year, this very debate caught the British Museum in a tangle when it innocently advertised a Korean Lunar New Year event. Okay, so yes, indeed, we've got the British Museum in London there, and they had some sort of activity there, but they called it the Korean Lunar New Year, and that stirred some controversy.
Boy, I'm sure it did. They didn't understand, that there are issues everywhere around the world. It's not just biases and prejudices that we have in America or in the UK. It's everywhere, people. I realized that once I came to Taiwan. I thought, oh, okay, they have problems with other cultures here too. So much to the museum's astonishment, their announcement where they innocently, without thinking, advertised a Korean Lunar New Year. It brought up a lot of criticism. To spark criticism just means to start it. And that's what happened with their innocent announcement. Astonishment is just another word for amazement. Wow, complete shock, complete surprise. You couldn't believe it. Amazing to someone's astonishment is a phrase we use a lot. To Tom's astonishment, he was paid 3 times what he had expected on a case. So just something that makes you really shocked or astonished is something surprising. Well, this announcement led to a lot of criticism from numerous Chinese online users. Nowadays, it's so easy to criticize. You jump online, a lot of times you're anonymous, and you post things that make you mad.
Right, so again, that phrase, much to the museum's astonishment, basically means the museum was astonished or very surprised about this announcement that this announcement sparked criticism from numerous Chinese online users. So you could also say, much to my surprise, I got paid 3 times the amount I was expecting.
Wow.
I was surprised that this happened. So yeah, much to the museum's astonishment, it sparked criticism. It caused criticism from some Chinese online users. Hey, you can't call that Korean New Year. What are you doing? That's a great crime. You should be punished for that. And moving on now to the next paragraph here, it says, those against Lunar New Year emphasize the tradition's Chinese roots, asserting that the term should reflect China's profound cultural and historical influence over nearby Asian countries. So again, we've got Japan, we've got Korea, we've got Vietnam, all these countries in Asia that were greatly influenced by China because it's been there forever, basically.
Yeah.
It's been there for 5,000 years. So you cannot possibly dare call this Korean Lunar New Year. That's very disrespectful. This particular celebration came from China. You owe us some respect.
So, of course, we're going to emphasize, China's traditional holidays. And we're going to emphasize the fact that China's history goes back farther or further than Korea's does. So that term should reflect China's profound culture and historical influence over all the other nearby Asian countries. Of course, they're proud. Their, history has led to a lot of amazing inventions, for example. However, here is another incident that is kind of the reverse. So in 2023, there was a Korean Australian pop singer. So she probably grew up in Australia but has a Korean ancestry. Maybe her parents are Korean and just, they immigrated over to Australia and she grew up there. Her name is Danielle Marsh. She sounds very much like just a regular Caucasian person. Maybe her dad's Australian and her mom's Korean.
Probably.
Anyway, she is a pop singer. I don't know her. I'm sorry to those of you out there who like and are fans of Danielle Marsh. But something just kind of different happened with them or her, and it shed a different light on this contention. To shed a light on something means to illuminate something to make things clearer. If you're kind of in the dark about a situation and you ask someone to come in and explain what's going on and they have all the facts, then they shed light on something that you didn't quite understand. Contention is when there's some sort of argument or disagreement among people. It could be among 2 people or a big group of people. Contention. And contentious is the adjective. My mom loved this word. Oh, you kids are so contentious, because we were always arguing as kids, of course. So what was the problem here? Well, her Chinese New Year message to fans was met with opposition from many in the Korean community. So here's a Korean Australian pop singer, and she just wishes her fans in the crowd, hey, happy Chinese New Year. And they, of course, were upset and offended because she should have known that she needed to say Korean Lunar New Year.
Right, so if the Koreans call it Korean New Year, then the Chinese people get upset. And if the Chinese call it Chinese New Year, then the Koreans get upset. There are lots of ways to get people upset these days.
Yeah.
And yes, indeed, this particular phrasing on her part was met with opposition from many in the Korean community. So opposition means you're against something, and support would be the opposite there. So yes, indeed, it was met with opposition, or it was opposed by many people in the Korean community, and both incidents illustrate or show us how challenging it is to choose the right expression. You could use the term guonian, but maybe the Koreans would say, well, that's Chinese. You need to use the Korean term. So I guess it's just impossible for everybody to be happy about these things. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. Let's take a break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。大家会不会觉得过年在台湾就讲过年，有没有想过外国人怎么说我们过年这件事？可能会说 Chinese New Year， 对不对？可是这个词居然这一阵子呢有些争议耶，因为其实会过 New Year 就是所谓农历年的，也不是只有华人啊，像韩国啊 或者是越南啊，其实也都会过所谓的农历年，就是不是按照西历那种1月1号的那一种年，有没有？那到底我们应该说 Chinese New Year 还是 Lunar New Year 呢？也就是农历新年这件事情呢，我们大家没有想过这件事。所以其实它是一个很重要的一个词，因为对外国人来说，他真的不知道该怎么做。好，事情是这样子的，也就是说呢，之前呢，去年的时候，其实就是大英博物馆，它就陷入了一个纠结，因为他当时就是宣传了一场所谓的韩国农历新年。我们看到第一段第3句这边有个双引号，有没有？ Korean Lunar New Year， 它就是宣传了一场那样子的一个 event， 一个活动。然后博物馆很惊讶的就是说，当时中国网友啊 Chinese online users 就觉得很批评，怎么可以说韩国的农历年呢？明明就是中国新年啊，韩国那边的人不是也是中国那边过去，我们的根源都是一样的吗？所以这个词其实是非常特别的。好，那我们在进入到第2段之前呢，第一段还有一些句子可以稍微看一下，比如说第2句，当然第2句这个是 OK 啦，没有特殊句型，可是我们想要讲的就是说 OK， 我们今天称这个过年的那个年，我们到底要称它为什么呢？称 A 为什么呢？称 A 为 B， 我们把这词画起来 refer to A as B。第一，这个 to 是介系词，后面的 as 也是介系词，所以到底要称 A 为什么呢？称这个 celebration 是这个还是那个呢？ refer to A as B， 称 A 为 B 或指涉 A 为 B。好，接下来第一段的第4句，我们有一个句型就特别可以画起来，就在句首的地方 much to the museum's astonishment， 令博物馆很惊讶的是什么？有时候我们会说，令我很惊讶的，令父母很失望的，令他很高兴的，令他很开心，令某人很痛苦的。在英文当中可以说 to 加 once， 再加上一些心情名词放在句首，就会有令什么什么感到如何如何的事。好，那当然可以在 to 的前面加上一个 much，令谁谁谁相当如何如何的。那这个句型呢，也在口语当中很常用，所以这地方可以把它学起来。好，那接下来我们到第2段呢，就要真的很仔细的来陈述了。你说中国网友他批评什么？反正就是说，因为这个所谓的农历年是中国起源的嘛，那中国华人就是到世界各地去生根了。所以这个中国网友当然会觉得说，这就是中国新年 Chinese New Year。 我们在第2段的第1句其实就是在谈这个东西。不过这个第2段第1句呢，有一个分词构句这个分词构句是 and 省略的分词构句。那你说 and 为什么要省略？常常的情况之下，是因为句子当中2个动词它是同时发生的。比如说在第1句，我们看到第一个动词是逗点前面的 emphasize， 就是强调嘛，强调一个中国的根源。逗点之后 and assert， 而且他们的强调这个同时，他们就主张说 OK， 这个词就是一定要强调中国对于周遭亚洲文化这种文化历史的影响，所以 Chinese 这个字一定要保留的。所以这2个动词其实就是他们的主张，他们的强调，他们认为，那这2个动词就同时发生，整个后面的 and 就直接删掉 assert， 就变 asserting 就可以了嘛。所以其实呢，有一个连接词 and 省略，它常会省略是因为动作可能很紧凑的发生，或者是几乎都是同时发生的，那干脆 and 省略，第2个动词变 ing。如果有 be ing 的话，再省略掉，不就剩下 pp 了吗？好，那接着我们就看啦，但是呢是有一些不同的意见，比如说像2023年那个韩裔的澳洲流行歌手牟智慧这个事件，他当时因为向粉丝发送 Chinese New Year 这个 message， 韩国人就不高兴啦。韩国人觉得韩国人的农历年跟中国有什么关系？就是个农历年嘛，所以其实大家的看法都不一样。好，不过在第2段第2句这个地方有一个关系子句的简化，这个关系子句简化先行词先抓出来，在 however 之后 another incident in 2023 后面的 involving 一直到逗点 March 这个地方 OK， 我们这个 involving 还原 which 或者是 that involved 那件事情是有关于 这个韩国歌手谋智慧这个地方可以先把它画起来，然后我们把关系词省略之后，后面的 involved 变成 ing。 好，那后面的第4句则特别要注意一下，第4句最后面的 how challenging it is blah 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 到句尾，这边有一个间接问句哦，是一个强调型的间接问句，有多困难呐？ How challenging it is 这件事 IT 虚主词，什么事呢？ To choose the right expression。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. It's our News Digest, and we're just focusing on one story today, and that's this controversy over whether people should wish you a happy Lunar New Year or wish you a Chinese New Year or even a Korean Lunar New Year. What's the appropriate, expression that you should use if you're wishing someone a wonderful holiday season? Well, we shared 2 different examples where people were offended or got their feelings hurt or their feathers went up. If you see especially cats or chickens even, if they're upset or angry, their feathers lift or their fur lifts up. And there were some upset people when a British museum innocently advertised a Korean Lunar New Year event they had at the museum. And they had a lot of Chinese online users that wrote in to criticize them for actually using that particular phrase. Oh, you should have used Chinese New Year. There is no Korean Lunar New Year. Actually, there is. Korea adopted this particular holiday. They have it in their own culture, and their celebration of it is a bit different. My best friend lives in Korea. She's a professor over there, and it's interesting to hear what they do and then compare it to what we do here in Taiwan. So the other incident we shared was one in 2023 involving a Korean-Australian pop singer, Danielle Marsh. Danielle happened to wish her fans a happy Chinese New Year. And, her Korean fans got a little bit upset at that. They were upset, and this message was met with opposition. When you're talking about opposition, it just means strong disagreement with something, or you're protesting against something. Maybe it's a plan, a law, something that is being enacted by government. Here, she got a lot of opposition or pushback by her Korean fans who didn't want her saying Chinese New Year. They wanted her to use Korean Lunar New Year.
Well, we've got one possible solution to just simply call it Lunar New Year.
Yeah.
So advocates of Lunar New Year argue that Chinese New Year is a relic of the West's tendency in the past to conflate Asian cultures, usually leaning toward the Chinese. So if you conflate something, you just kind of add things together. Basically, it means that Western countries are looking at Asia as one big culture. They're not really taking smaller cultures into consideration, and they tend to favor the Chinese, so they'll call it Chinese New Year. And so these advocates are suggesting we call it Lunar New Year. And it's a relic of the West's past. A relic is just something left over from the past. It survives from an earlier time. And, of course, it's kind of outdated. And this bias is evident in phrases such as Chinese cabbage and Chinese pancake, which can overlook the rich diversity of Asian cuisines. So we've got this bias here, which means you favor one thing over another. Of course, the West tends to look at Asia more in terms of being China than Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, etc. And so that's a bias here. And we've got these terms Chinese cabbage, and we've got Chinese pancake, which I believe is what we call 葱油饼 in English, but I've heard chive pancakes myself.
Oh, really? I don't call them anything in English, so that's
just
kind of
葱油饼,
interesting. Yeah, that's what we call them. Yeah, so sometimes people in the West, they don't understand that Asian countries have different culture. cultures. And so they always kind of lump everybody in together. That's what that word conflate means. If you conflate something, you kind of confuse everything and you kind of throw everything together. And that's not true. Asia has lots of different countries with different types of culture. They're not all the same, even though some of them, some of our holidays at least, originated from China. So this bias, a bias is to have some sort of prejudice against or towards something. You have your own opinion before you know the full facts. So the bias is evident in phrases such as Chinese cabbage, Chinese pancake, which I have seen on cooking websites and cooking shows. And that can overlook the rich diversity of Asian cuisines. They're all so different. Although nowadays, Tom, everybody's so sensitive about culture and cultural appropriation that even on cooking shows, they'll make sure and let you know this is Vietnamese. Or this is from Hong Kong, so that everybody's very clear where it comes from. So many Asian countries, while acknowledging Chinese historical influence, they've incorporated their own unique elements or distinctive parts into the celebration in their own countries. That is so true. To acknowledge something is to admit something's true or accept that something's true, or that a situation exists. For example, I could say most smokers acknowledge that smoking isn't healthy, but they continue to do it because they're addicted. So sometimes you just have to acknowledge something and then move along. So a lot of these countries, including Korea, will say, yeah, we got that. Some of this influence came from China originally, but we've made it into our own sort of tradition, and you have to respect that.
Right, they have their own unique elements. They've incorporated those elements, and we've got the example of Vietnam here. They celebrate the year of the cat rather than the year of the rabbit from the conventional Chinese zodiac. The zodiac, of course, is those 12 different signs, the dog, the tiger, the cow, the dragon, etc. Those are all part of the Chinese zodiac. But the Vietnamese don't have a year of the rabbit. They think the cat is better instead, so they have a year of the cat, and hence, or therefore, an increasing number of people believe it appropriate to use Lunar New Year because it's a more inclusive term. So to believe something is appropriate, that just means you think it's more suitable, you think it's the right solution. And this could be a more inclusive term, which can be all-encompassing. It basically covers all the different kinds of New Years there are. Let's just call it Lunar New Year because they all have that in common. They're all based on the lunar cycles as opposed to the solar cycles.
Yeah, so all of this is quite interesting. And, you kind of have to acknowledge that everyone has a different way of looking at things. So there's an increasing number of people who believe it appropriate to use Lunar New Year because it's a more inclusive term. Inclusive just means including more people. I think still, though, to be fair to everyone, you should be able to use the expression you like. And not be forced into using what other people like. That would be forced speech. I'm against that. I'm for free speech. So despite the growing acceptance for Lunar New Year, the different ideologies or the different ways of belief behind these terms represent a challenge in reaching a general consensus. What's a consensus? Well, a consensus is where you've got a lot of agreement in a group. So have you reached consensus? You'll often hear that, from a business meeting. Maybe you're worrying about or planning a new project and people disagree on how it should roll out. But when you reach consensus, you've got a majority of the people who think one way is better than the other ways. So you want to reach a consensus or have consensus on something.
A general agreement, and public figures and institutions should ponder or think about the implications of their choices of words. So yes, indeed, if you're a big pop star in Australia or whatever, you got to be careful of what you say. You probably could say Lunar New Year and not stir so much controversy. And even a friendly greeting could invite unexpected trouble. So yeah, you got to be careful these days because people's feelings get hurt more than they used to. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will totally destroy me. So yes, indeed, you got to be careful about what you say.
Yes, you do. Right now, someone who never has to be careful is our Chinese teacher because our Chinese teacher always says the right thing.
好，所以我们接下来就进到第3段啦。当然，提倡农历新年的认为中国新年是中国，那是因为相对于西方来说，他们觉得那个亚洲的华人呢，大概就是中国嘛，那它就是一种偏见。这个偏见出现在第3段第2句 bias 这个字。好，这个偏见呢，就是说，例如在英文有词 Chinese cabbage 大白菜，可大白菜不是只有在中国有啊，那韩国也很多啊，还有 Chinese pancakes 那个所谓的葱油饼，但在英文叫做中国煎饼啊。可是葱油饼、中国煎饼这个好像有一点稍微不是说那么具有代表性啦。总而言之，这只是一个英文当中的偏见。重点就是说，很多的亚洲国家，我们虽然承认中国历史的影响，可是其实我们有好多自己的元素都融入在文化当中了。接下来我们就要来看一下第3段。第3段在第3句这个地方，逗点之后也有一个连接词保留的分词构句哦。逗点之后的 while 是虽然很多的亚洲国家 many Asian countries他们其实都 acknowledge 公认 Chinese historical influence 中国历史上的影响。你看连接词保留的分词构句，这里的公认又用了 ing 型。那下面就举一些例子，比如说越南就会庆祝猫年啊，就不是庆祝兔年这样子。所以到底应该用 Chinese New Year 还是 Lunar New Year 呢？大家可能还是可以先稍微讨论看看。不过呢，这个媒体的用词可能要稍微小心，公众人物在选字的时候也要小心哦。所以作者其实到句尾的地方到整个文章的末段，他的 tone 他的语调是非常的 cautious， 比较警告性的。也就是说呢，这2个词如果你要用的时候要稍微小心一点。我的 evidence 在哪里呢？因为最后一段最后一句有一个 otherwise， 否则的话，它就是一种警告。Even a friendly greeting could invite unexpected trouble。所以下次你碰到外国朋友的时候，就可以说明这2个词的不同哦。以上是我们今天内容，我是 Anna， 我们下次见。
Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Thank you for joining us, and no matter what you call it, we wish you a happy 过年 and happy Year of the Dragon. From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.